long before the beasts learned to wear faces of nightmare, before chaos found a home in the air. The continent was quiet. Its rivers kept their slow conversations with the sky. Its mountains listened only to the patience of stone, and the seasons turned without fear of interruption. The oldest peoples walked its soil, first the gnomes, and then the dwarves, steady craftsmen of the world's first shapes. They had taught the hills to bear structure, the earth to answer to hammer and chisel. Then came the elves, the Anansedi, who sailed across strange seas from another world, bringing with them the memory of a gentler sky. They settled among the valleys and rivers, weaving beauty and pride into the lands they would call home. For an age, the continent was theirs, bound by craft, memory, and quiet dominion. It is said that in those years, the world was whole, the air was clean. Of the wild resonance men would one day name magic. The heavens moved with balance, and the soil answered only to the weight of mortal feet. The elves composed songs that carried through the forests. The dwarves built halls that hummed with the sound of labor and kinship. The gnomes shaped delicate wonders whose names would be forgotten when later centuries spoke of wars instead of making. It was a time of measures and certainties, when dreams mirrored the daylight faithfully. Then, without warning or sign, the world changed. The conjunction came not as omen, but as wound, sudden, violent, and beyond comprehension. Skies folded upon themselves, dimensions collided, and the walls between realities shattered. In an instant, the continent became a crossroads of worlds that had never meant to meet. Through the rift poured monsters from unknown spheres, creatures of pure instinct and hunger, and with them came chaos itself, the raw, untamed current that later mages would call magic. It infused the land, the water, and the living things of the world, altering the natural order and granting the gift and the curse of power. Among the many who found themselves upon this altered earth were humans, whether they arrived through the conjunction or migrated in its aftermath is not known, for even the oldest chronicles cannot decide. What is certain is that they were strangers, fragile and quick to multiply, driven by need and fire. The elder races watched them with wary curiosity, unaware that these newcomers would one day inherit the lands that had stood for millennia. The monsters that emerged after the conjunction were beyond reason, creatures born of alien hunger. Villages vanished in the dark. Roads became prayers of survival. The elves and dwarves fought against this new tide and against the rising spread of humankind, their long memories and slow births proving no match for the rapid growth and relentless ambition of men. Over centuries, not days, the elder races began to fade, withdrawing into their hidden forests and mountain keeps as humankind claimed the open world. In the centuries that followed, chaos remained both gift and curse. Some sought to harness it, others to destroy it, and a few dared to shape it. Among the boldest were human mages, who, faced with endless terror, conceived of a terrible solution to forge protectors through alchemy and mutation, to make of man a weapon that could withstand the nightmares born of the conjunction. From their experiments would one day emerge the first witches, cursed and sanctified alike. Thus ended the age before monsters, not with the fading of a song, but with its shattering. The rivers still flowed, but they carried the reflection of strange skies. The forests still stood, but their silence was heavier. The mountains still watched, but with eyes that had seen too much. And so began the long twilight between what was and what must be, the dawn of an age where men and monsters would learn to share the same shadow. Chapter 1. The the conjunction, and the chaos. Before the rending of the worlds, there was a moment of stillness so complete that the air itself seemed to listen. The skies held their breath, and the rivers which had long whispered to the sea fell silent, as if unwilling to carry the echo of what was to come. The continent, untouched by magic, moved with quiet confidence through its measured seasons. Mountains dreamed of stone, forests of growth, and the creatures of that age knew no fear greater than hunger or storm. But the balance of the world is never eternal. Somewhere beyond its horizon, the fabric of existence had already begun to strain. It happened without herald or warning. The stars altered their pattern, the air shuddered, and then, all at once, the heavens broke. The conjunction of the spheres, a cataclysm beyond imagining, tore through the firmament and split the boundaries that had kept the worlds apart. Skies folded upon skies, lands brushed against lands, and the seas swelled with the memories of other realities. In a single, unfathomable instant, the continent was remade. Worlds collided, not in flame or noise, but in a vast, soundless convulsion, as if the universe had gasped and forgotten how to exhale. The veil between realities thinned, then vanished, and through the cracks poured things without names. Some came as shapes of flesh and fury, the first monsters of the new age. Others came as forces, invisible, radiant, and wild, threads of chaos that wound themselves into the fabric of the world. Magic had entered the continent. It did not arrive with purpose. It arrived as consequence. In that aftermath, the sky no longer matched its reflection. Strange constellations burned where once there had been familiar lights, and the air hummed faintly, as though vibrating with the pulse of some unseen heart. The forests grew darker, the seas deeper, and life itself felt heavier beneath the weight of unseen power. Chaos had entered every corner of existence, though not all could sense it. Only a rare few would learn, through will and discipline, to shape it, to draw upon this new current and bend it to thought. These would become the first mages, students of an art still nameless, their discoveries built on both brilliance and ruin. Among the many who found themselves upon this altered earth were humans. Whether they arrived through the conjunction or migrated in its aftermath is not known, for even the oldest chronicles cannot decide. What is certain is that they were strangers, fragile and quick to multiply, driven by need and fire. The elder races watched them with wary curiosity, unaware that these newcomers would one day inherit the lands that had stood for millennia. The monsters that emerged after the conjunction were beyond reason, creatures born of alien hunger. Villages vanished in the dark. Roads became prayers of survival. The elves and dwarves fought against this new tide, and against the rising spread of humankind, their long memories and slow births proving no match for the rapid growth and relentless ambition of men. Over centuries, not days, the elder races began to fade, withdrawing into their hidden forests and mountain keeps as humankind claimed the open world. Chaos remained both gift and burden. Some sought to harness it, others to destroy it, and a few dared to shape it. Among the boldest were human mages, who, faced with endless terror, conceived of a grim solution: to forge protectors through alchemy and mutation, to make of man a weapon that could withstand the nightmares born of the conjunction. From their experiments would one day emerge the first witches, cursed and sanctified alike. Thus ended the age before monsters, not with the fading of a song, but with its shattering. The rivers still flowed, but they carried the reflection of strange skies. The forests still stood, but their silence was heavier. The mountains still watched, but with eyes that had seen too much. And so began the long twilight between what was and what must be, the dawn of an age where men and monsters would learn to share the same shadow. Chapter 2. The First Alchemists of the Path. In the centuries after the conjunction, the world had not yet found its balance. Chaos lingered like smoke in clear air, visible only to those with the wit or the curse to sense it. Among humankind, new to the continent and untempered by the long patience of the elder races, there grew a hunger to understand this power. It was a hunger that would shape empires and damn many in the process. The first human scholars of chaos were neither sages nor saints. They were alchemists, physicians, wanderers, and thieves of knowledge. What they possessed above all else was curiosity unburdened by caution. The elves, who had known the art long before, regarded these humans with wary disdain, teaching only fragments of their wisdom. The Aen Savhern, the elven sages, warned that humanity's reckless grasping at chaos would burn the world twice, once in fire and once in memory. Yet even fragments were enough. Humanity learned swiftly, crafting its own brutal grammar of power, imperfect but effective. In the ruins left by the conjunction, they experimented with flame, with light, with life itself, and in their failures, they glimpsed the shape of control. Early spellcraft was perilous and primitive. To summon fire was to risk being consumed by it. To heal was to invite decay. Many of the first mages burned their minds, as they burned their bodies, consumed by the very forces they sought to master. Still, humankind persisted. Where the elves sought harmony with the art, humans sought dominion over generations. Their studies evolved from isolated experiments to formal instruction. The academies of Aretusa and Bernard would arise centuries later from these beginnings, schools founded not on peace, but on the memory of chaos, barely contained. Yet magic alone could not guard the world against what the conjunction had unleashed. Monsters stalked the fields and forests, indifferent to spell or steel. Kingdoms fell, rebuilt, and fell again. In this darkness, a secret fellowship of mages conceived an unholy design to forge protectors who would wield alchemy and mutation as their armor. They worked in hidden strongholds, Risberg among them, and their methods were as cruel as their purpose was clear. Among the architects of this forbidden craft were Cosimo Malaspina and his student Alzor, names whispered with equal parts reverence and fear. Subjects were chosen from among the desperate, the condemned, and the forgotten. Through the agony of the mutagens, potions of venom and sorcery, they were remade. Muscles strengthened, senses sharpened, hearts slowed until their beats became steady as a smith's hammer. Few survived the trial of the grasses. Those who did awoke, changed, their eyes pale and reflective, their bodies resistant to poison and fatigue. They could see in darkness and hear the tremor of danger in the air. Yet though their humanity was altered, it was not erased. Some still laughed, still remembered kindness, still dreamed, though those dreams were often haunted. These survivors were the first witches. Their creators had not built soldiers, but wanderers, blades meant to walk between humanity and the abyss. At first they were tools of the mages who had made them, sent to cleanse the continent of its new terrors, but in time they became their own order, shaping a creed that bound them not to kings or causes, but to necessity. They would kill monsters, not men. They would walk alone, unthanked, unseen, yet indispensable. Among these early orders rose the fortress of Kaer Morhen, where the school of the wolf made its home. Others followed, the cat in the south, the griffin in the mountains, the viper and the bear in distant lands, each with its own methods, symbols, and philosophies. The witches shared no banners, only a burden. Their alchemy, refined through generations, became ritual. Their mutations, once experiment, became tradition. And though they differed in training and temperament, all walked the same path, one that led ever towards solitude. Humanity owed them survival, yet met them with fear. Their yellow eyes and measured calm marked them as unnatural. Villagers whispered of curses, priests condemned them as heresy made flesh. Still the witches endured. They were reminders of a truth most would rather forget, that safety is often built on sacrifice, and that the line between savior and monster is drawn in pain, not purity. And so the age of alchemy became the age of the path. In the shadow of their creator's towers, the witches stood sentinel, living testaments to the cost of defiance. The mages who had made them faded into legend, but their legacy endured in every glint of silver, every potion's hiss, every lonely road walked by a man who had chosen to become what the world required. Between the silence of the mountains and the murmurs of chaos, they kept the balance, not as heroes, but as the price of survival. Chapter 3. The Trials of the Grasses. In the high valleys of Cadadwen, where the wind carries the scent of frost and iron, there stands a fortress that remembers pain. Its walls, grey and patient, have seen the passage of centuries and the unending echo of footsteps, light and small, at first, then fewer, then none at all. It is here, at Kaer Morhen, the stronghold of the school of the wolf, that the alchemists' greatest cruelty and their most enduring gift took form. Within these halls, the path of the witcher begins, not with triumph, but with terror. The boys who came to the keep did not come by choice. Some were orphans of wars they could not name. Others were children taken by the law of surprise, or sold by desperate parents seeking coin or safety. They arrived under the watch of men who neither smiled nor threatened, veterans of silence, their yellow eyes glinting faintly in the torchlight. For most, the journey was the first step toward a promise spoken by others: food, purpose, strength. None understood that what awaited them was a trial measured not in courage, but in endurance. The trials began in chambers deep beneath the keep, where the air was thick with the scent of herbs, metal, and old blood. Alchemists in hooded robes moved with ritual precision, their instruments gleaming in the dimness. Upon stone tables lay the boys, each restrained not by chains, but by fear. The mutagenic mixtures, potions born of alchemy and chaos, were administered drop by drop, seeping into their veins like liquid fire. Convulsions followed, bones strained, muscles tore and rebuilt. The heartbeat slowed until it seemed to vanish, then surged again with unnatural steadiness. Of every 10 who entered, perhaps 3 or 4 survived. The rest were carried away, their names lost to the snow. They called it the Trial of the Grasses, a name too soft for what it was. The grasses were the base herbs that fueled the mutations, gathered from places where chaos clung to the soil, brewed with toxins, alchemical extracts, and fragments of the unknown. They became a gauntlet that reshaped flesh and spirit alike. Those who survived emerged, transformed. Their eyes glowed like molten amber, their senses sharpened to unbearable clarity. They could see in darkness, track a heartbeat at 20 paces, and stand unflinching where ordinary men would collapse. Their hearts beat slow and measured, their reflexes beyond mortal reach. Yet despite their altered nature, they retained the capacity for thought, choice, and feeling. They were not soulless, only scarred. When the fever finally passed, the survivors awoke to a silence more absolute than death. The pain was gone, but the world had changed. Collars were sharper, sounds nearer, the pulse of life impossibly loud. Some wept quietly, though no tears came. Others stared at their hands, flexing them as if to recall the shape of what they had been. None spoke. The alchemists recorded their pulses, their stillness, and then left them to the care of the witches who had come before. It was there, in that emptiness, that the path began. Training followed. The sword was their scripture, the signs their silent prayers. They learned to draw symbols in the air that bent chaos to their will. Ard for force, Igni for flame, Quen for protection, Jordan for entrapment, Axi for persuasion. Their bodies, remade by mutation, responded with perfect obedience, though the price of failure was always death. Each movement became meditation, a blade lifted in rhythm with the breath, a step balanced between thought and instinct. They trained until the world around them blurred into one endless trial. Only when they no longer flinched at the whisper of steel did their masters nod in approval. Elixirs became their allies, potions of lethal toxicity that enhanced reflex, speed, and perception in battle. To drink them was to risk death anew, for even a witch's body could withstand only so much. These elixirs were not a necessity of life, but tools of survival, used sparingly and with ritual care. Their effects were temporary, their cost measured in pain and exhaustion. The witches learned to accept this bargain, that power borrowed from poison must always be repaid. Not all who survived the trials were identical. Though many shared the pale eyes and calm demeanor that marked their kind, only a rare few, such as Geralt of Rivia, bore the white hair and heightened mutations that made them legends. For most, their transformation ended with survival, and survival was enough. The School of the Wolf was not alone in its craft. Across the continent, other fortresses rose: the cat in the south, the griffin in the mountains, the viper and the bear in distant lands, each shaping its own methods, rituals, and doctrines. Their details differed, but all shared the same grim purpose: to stand where others would fall, and to walk the path between man and monster. When their training was complete, the witches left the keep and stepped into a world that no longer welcomed them. Villagers turned away. Mothers clutched their children, priests whispered curses. Yet when the beasts came, drowners from the rivers, wraiths from the fields, fiends from the forests, it was these same outcasts who stood between civilization and ruin. To endure the trial was to carry a covenant of solitude. Every witcher bore the memory of the grasses in his veins, the taste of metal, the ache of transformation, the echo of the names that did not survive. They seldom spoke of it, for the pain was wordless, and yet, among themselves, they understood. Pain was not the enemy. It was the forge. It was what made them enduring when others broke. The trial was not only a test of body, but a baptism of purpose, a reshaping of fear into focus and of agony into endurance. In the long winters, when snow sealed the keep and the wind howled through its hollow towers, some of the veterans would whisper that the trial was the truest teacher, not the sword, nor the signs, nor even the masters, but the suffering that stripped away weakness until only will remained. For will, they said, is the only magic that endures when chaos fails. And so the witches walked from the mountains, carrying that silence within them. They were not saints nor sinners, but survivors of the oldest lesson the world had ever offered, that to stand between light and shadow is to belong to neither. The grasses had taken their pasts, their futures, and much of their humanity. What remained was purpose, and in that perhaps a kind of peace. Chapter 4. Kaer Morhen and the Brotherhood. In the mountains of Cadwyn, where the snow falls even in spring, and the wind carries the song of silence, stands a fortress built, not for glory, but for endurance. Kaer Morhen, the keep of the wolf, rose from the rock, like a scar made sacred. Its towers were plain, its gates unadorned, its stones chosen not for beauty, but for strength. It was a place apart from the world, a refuge for those who had survived the impossible and needed no witness to their survival. Here the witches of the School of the Wolf forged their brotherhood. The keep was more monastery than fortress, its walls echoing not with prayer, but with the ring of steel and the whisper of breath drawn between strikes. Each dawn began in silence, broken only by the rhythm of training, the soft crunch of boots on frost, the hiss of blades, the low chant of exercises passed from master to pupil. The witches did not sing songs of heroism or victory. They spoke instead of precision, of patience, of knowing when not to strike. Their brotherhood was not bound by affection, but by the quiet understanding of shared suffering. The sword was their scripture, 2 blades, always, one of steel for men and beasts, one of silver for monsters and myths. The forge burned day and night, tended by those who had outlived the path, but could not outlive its discipline. The signs, Ord Igni, Quen, Jordan, and Axi, were practiced until they became second nature, gestures of instinct rather than thought. Kaer Morhen was more than a school. It was a memory given shape, an answer to the chaos that had once threatened to erase humanity entirely. The winters were long in the Blue Mountains, and within those walls the witches studied, trained, and endured. They brewed elixirs whose recipes were known only to their kind, and when spring returned, they descended once more into the lowlands to ply their trade. They were wanderers by duty, but each year they returned to the keep, to rest, to repair, to remember. The old masters recorded their hunts, catalogued new beasts, and refined the trials for those who would follow, work that would cease forever in the years before the fall. In the evenings, when the wind fell still, the veterans would gather in the hall by the great fire and speak in low tones of the world beyond, a world that did not love them, yet could not do without them. For a time, the brotherhood thrived, but time is the one monster even witches cannot slay. As the centuries passed, the world changed. Monsters grew fewer, kingdoms grew larger. Men forgot the darkness that had once haunted every road. Gratitude turned to suspicion, suspicion to fear. Rumors spread that the witches had grown cruel, that they stole children for their trials, that their alchemy was witchcraft, born of the devil's seed. Priests preached against them, kings ignored them, and the people who had once begged for their help began to turn them away. The first attack came in winter. A mob, led by a zealot priest, whose name history did not keep, climbed the mountain passes to Kaer Morhen. They were joined by soldiers and peasants alike, their numbers swelling with each mile. Within the keep, only a handful of witches remained, the rest scattered on contracts across the continent. The alchemists and apprentices had no swords, only books and mixtures that burned too quickly to defend with. When the gates fell, the fire came. They burned the laboratories first, the books, the vials, the mutagens, all the knowledge that had been gathered through centuries of pain, gone in a single day. The screams of dying alchemists echoed through the halls. The The smell of burning potions filled the air with a poisonous sweetness. Witches fought with the precision of those who know death well, cutting through the mob in grim silence, but they were too few. By dusk, Kaer Morhen was a ruin of ash and blood. Its forges went cold. The secrets of the trial of the grasses, the formulas, the sequences, the rituals were lost forever. When the survivors returned from their wanderings, they found only bones and smoke. They buried their dead beneath the frozen earth and swore no vengeance, for vengeance was the luxury of men who had something left to lose. Among them was Vesemir, the eldest of their number, who would keep what little remained of their knowledge and train those few who still sought the path. They rebuilt what they could, a wall here, a gate there, but the heart of the fortress was gone. From that day, Kaer Morhen ceased to be a cradle of creation and became a tomb of memory. The witches no longer spoke of brotherhood. They spoke only of survival. Each winter thereafter, fewer returned. The world no longer sent its children to the keep, and the few who sought the path found no one to teach them. The halls grew silent, the training grounds covered in moss and snow. Yet even in ruin, Kaer Morhen remained a sanctuary. When the witches came home, they lit the great fire once more, and its smoke rose into the cold air like a prayer, not to gods, but to the memory of endurance. They were brothers still, though scattered and few, bound by the knowledge that no one else could bear the weight they carried, and when one fell on the path, another would carve his name into the stone beside the keep's gate, so that the mountain might remember what men had chosen to forget. In the ruins, the wind still carried the scent of oils and steel, reminders of a brotherhood forged in necessity and undone by ignorance. For Kaer Morhen is not only a place, it is the silence that follows every battle, the bond between those who survive, and the reminder that even the strongest fortress cannot withstand the fear of those it protects. And so the brotherhood endures, not in number, but in memory. The keep still stands among the snow and stone, its towers broken but unbowed, its halls whispering the names of those who once walked its paths. For as long as one witcher draws breath beneath the sun, Kaer Morhen remains, not as home, but as heart. Chapter 5. The Decline and the First Pogrom. In the centuries that followed the fall of Kaer Morhen, the witch's presence upon the continent began to fade like a candle burning too long in the wind. Their keeps still stood, Calaseren of the Griffin, Palancarakaduk of the Bear, Gorthogavad the Viper, and others whose names are now dust. But their halls grew empty, their forges cold. The age of monsters was ending, and with its passing, the world turned its fear toward those who had once been its shield. At first, the decline was slow and silent. Contracts grew scarce, as beasts receded to the dark corners of the wilderness, driven there by steel, spell, and fire. The great roads were cleared, the cities walled, and humankind declared itself master of the land. Yet mastery breeds arrogance, the memory of terror dulled, and with it, gratitude. The same voices that had once cried for witches' aid began to whisper that such men were unnatural, relics of a darker age, who no longer had a place in the world they had made safe. Priests and kings found use for these whispers. Temples denounced witches as creatures of blasphemy, half-men born of alchemy and sin. Monarchs, fearful of what they could not command, forbade them from their courts. Scholars penned treatises on the dangers of mutation, calling them a corruption of creation. One by one, the witcher schools fell from favor, villages turned them away, cities taxed them, and even the desperate learned to lie rather than pay their price. Neutrality, once their strength, became their curse. To every side, they were a reminder of something feared, and half forgotten the cost of survival. Still, they endured. For generations they walked the path, keeping their vows, slaying the remnants of chaos that haunted the borders of civilization. In the north, the wolves of Kaer Morhen maintained their silence and their code. In the south, the cats grew restless, turning their blades against men as often as monsters, operating far into Nilfgaard and beyond. The griffins clung to honor and learning, the bears sought solitude in the mountains, the vipers crossed the deserts towards Zerrikania, their medallions vanishing into sand and sun. Each school weathered its decline in its own way, and none foresaw that the world's contempt would soon become violence. The first pogroms began in scattered provinces, born of hunger and fear. In Novigrad and its neighboring realms, failed harvests and plague drove the starving to seek meaning in misery, and the priests of the eternal fire were quick to give it to them. They spoke of witches as the source of corruption, of taint in blood and soil. The sermons spread faster than the plague, and fear became flame. Mobs gathered, peasants, soldiers, zealots, armed with torches, faith, and ignorance. The first to burn was Harmon Kaduch, the keep of the Bear School, its halls reduced to cinders under the mountain snow. From there the purges spread like sickness, wave upon wave, consuming the continent's scattered brotherhoods. Kaer Morhen fell next, its libraries and laboratories torn apart by hands that understood neither their value nor their danger. The witches of the Viper vanished into the deserts of Zerrikania, and those of the Cat scattered across the south, hunted by the very nobles they had once served. In some places, witches were dragged into city squares and hanged. In others they were stoned beside their contracts, their medallions taken as trophies. The keeps that survived closed their gates and vanished into legend. When the fires finally dimmed, the age of the Witcher brotherhoods was over. Those who survived the pogroms wandered as relics of a world unwilling to remember them. They walked the same roads they had once made safe, unseen, and unwelcome. Some continued the path until age or injury claimed them. Others laid down their swords and vanished into anonymity. Only a few, like Vesemir of Kaer Morhen, endured, not because of hope, but because endurance itself had become his creed. He trained what few orphans still came to the mountains, but even he knew the line would end with his students. The full secrets of mutation were lost, the formulas and rituals scattered or destroyed, and what fragments remained were too dangerous to repeat. As the centuries turned, the world changed its shape again. Magic bent toward politics, kingdoms rose and fell, and the last monsters of the old age grew rare enough to be mistaken for myth. In taverns, the word witcher became a tale told to frighten children, a story of silver swords and yellow eyes, and so the truth faded, as truth often does, beneath the weight of rumor and fear. In time, even the witches began to doubt themselves. They questioned the purpose of their path, the meaning of neutrality in a world that no longer believed in monsters. But the path does not ask for belief, it asks only for steps taken, one after another, into the dark. And so they continued, few and unremembered, walking roads that led always away from the warmth of hearths and the comfort of belonging. The pogroms had not destroyed them outright. They had merely taught them how to disappear. They did not fade to escape the world, but because the world no longer had need of what they were. And perhaps, in that vanishing, the witches fulfilled their final purpose, to become myth once more, as the monsters they hunted had once been. For the world forgets what it no longer fears, and fear, like fire, must sometimes burn itself to ash before it can be reborn. Thus ended the brotherhoods, not with war, but with forgetting. The keeps stood empty, the swords gathered dust, and the medallions grew cold upon the chests of men who walked alone. Yet even in that silence, the echo of Kaer Morhen remained, the whisper of steel in winter air, the scent of oil and snow, and the memory of a time when monsters still had names, and the men who slew them still had a place in the world. Chapter 6. The Last of Their Kind. Long after the fires of the pogroms had faded to smoke and memory, Kaer Morhen still stood among the blue mountains, silent and half-buried beneath centuries of snow. Its halls no longer echoed with the clamor of training or the hiss of potions brewing. The great forge lay cold, its anvil rusted with years of disuse. Yet within its broken walls, a single hearth still burned, small, stubborn, and enduring. That flame belonged to Vesemir. He was the last of the old masters, older than the kingdoms whose borders shifted like tides below his mountain. His hair was white with age, not mutation, and his eyes carried both wisdom and sorrow. Alone, he kept the keep alive. He mended its crumbling stones, tended the fire, oiled the swords that would never again be swung in numbers. In the long winters he spoke softly to the ghosts of his brothers, remembering the laughter that once filled the hall, the endless drills, the cold dawns that had shaped them all. The silence answered him faithfully, as silence always does. In time, children began to find their way to the mountains again, some through fate, others through the law of surprise, and a few through the cruel barter of desperation. Vesemir took them in, as he had once been taken, and though the world had changed, the purpose had not. From what fragments of the old notes survived, he rekindled the trials. The formulas were incomplete, the rituals dangerous, but necessity has always been the parent of courage. Of every group brought to Kaer Morhen, only a handful survived. From those few, the last generation of witches was born. Geralt, Eskel, Lambert, and Cohen. Their names would come to echo far beyond the mountains. Each bore the mark of the grasses in his veins, the slow pulse, and the sharpened sense, the unshakable calm before the storm. Their trials were harsher than those of old, for the knowledge had thinned, and the mutagens were unstable. Yet Vesemir's hands were steady, and his heart patient. In their endurance, he saw not the rebirth of an order, but the last flowering of a dying lineage. Among them, Geralt of Rivia was unlike the rest. The mutagens had altered him further than intended. His hair turned white, his reflexes unmatched, his endurance beyond even witcher measure. He was called the White Wolf, a name that carried both reverence and superstition. To some, he was the embodiment of the path's last ideal, unyielding, disciplined, and neutral. To others, he was proof that the mutations had gone too far. Yet beneath his pale eyes and practiced detachment, there lingered something the trials had never purged: compassion. It was this quiet, dangerous empathy that set him apart from every witcher who came before. The world he walked was not the one his order had been made for. The great beasts of the conjunction had grown rare, and the monsters of the age wore crowns, robes, and banners. Witchers still took contracts, drowners in river bends, wraiths in barrows, but most of their work was spent mediating between men whose greed had outlived the darkness they feared. They had been created to slay creatures of nightmare. Now they walked among nightmares made flesh. Their neutrality, once their creed, became a riddle with no answer. Each winter, the witches returned to Kaer Morhen as they had in ages past, There, in the Hall of Echoes, they shared their stories, repaired their weapons, and drank from old barrels that never seemed to empty. Vesemir would sit by the hearth, listening more than speaking, his gaze distant. He taught them what remained of the old ways, not only the blade and the sign, but patience, restraint, and the dignity of endurance. Though they laughed and jested as brothers do, all knew the truth that hung in the air like frost. When Vesemir's fire went out, so too would the age of witches. As the years wore thin, the world beyond the mountains forgot them almost entirely. Boydies turned their stories into songs, peasants turned their names into curses, and scholars debated whether witches had ever truly existed. Yet still they endured, not for glory, nor for gratitude, but because the path demanded it. There is a kind of holiness in perseverance, and though no priest would speak it, the witches understood it well. They had become relics of necessity, monuments to a fear that no longer had form. In the end, the last winter at Kaer Morhen came quietly. Vesemir's pupils returned one final time, older now, scarred by battles both fought and endured. They repaired what little could still be mended, shared one final drink before the hearth, and spoke of no future beyond the dawn. When morning came, the fire had gone out, and the keep stood silent once more. The mountains held their breath, and the world moved on. The path did not die that day. It simply grew still. Somewhere on a distant road, a witcher still walked with two swords at his back, guided by the rhythm of footfall and purpose. For though the age of monsters had ended, the need for men who could face them, in whatever form they took, would never truly vanish. The witches became stories, and stories, if told long enough, become memory, and memory, if kept long enough, becomes truth again. Thus ended the age of witches, not with battle, nor with sorrow, but with silence. Yet in that silence lay endurance, and in endurance, meaning. The medallions may no longer hum, the swords may rest in rust and dust, but the wind through Kaer Morhen still sings their hymn of duty without praise, of strength without malice, of the last of their kind, and the world that forgot to thank them. Chapter 7. The Path and the Paradox of Neutrality. Of all the creeds that once bound the witches, none endured longer or burned deeper than their oath of neutrality. It was their compass and their curse, the rule that they would serve none and judge none, that they would stand between worlds without belonging to either. In the beginning, it was not born of philosophy, but of necessity. The witches had no nation, no church, no kin. They owed allegiance only to the path, and the path demanded constancy in a world forever shifting between peace and ruin. Neutrality was a shield against the storms of politics and faith, while kings waged their endless wars and priests set fire to truth in the name of purity. The witches walked the edges of that chaos. They took no sides, for sides are luxuries of those who believe in victory. They hunted monsters, the unthinking, the unnatural, the truly alien, and in doing so preserved a balance, neither moral nor divine, but practical. To live, they had to be trusted by all, and trusted by none, and so they withdrew from the quarrels of men, claiming the path as their only master. Yet with time, the creed became its own paradox, for to serve humanity without serving its passions was to protect a thing one could not touch. The witches' detachment preserved their purpose, but at the cost of meaning. They were guardians without belonging, judges without judgment. Their eyes saw clearly, but their hearts were taught not to feel. The more they defended humankind, the more distant they became from it, until the very species they saved could no longer see them as its own. Geralt of Rivia walked this paradox more deeply than any before him. He carried neutrality as both armor and wound. In taverns and courts alike, he refused to choose sides, insisting that a witcher kills monsters, not men. Yet life offered him no such clarity. In the heat of war, he found that monsters wore faces both fair and familiar. He saw cruelty born not of mutation, but of choice. He saved lives for coin, then risked his own for compassion. He denied destiny, yet became its servant. He loved though his creed forbade it. Each act of mercy drew him further from neutrality, yet closer to truth. For Geralt understood, in ways few others could, that the absence of choice is not balance, it is surrender. In his friendships and his solitude, the contradictions of the path became visible. Vesemir's wisdom, Yennefer's will, Ciri's innocence and fury, all mirrored the same question: can one walk the middle road without being consumed by those who stray from it? For every act of detachment, there comes a moment of consequence, and for every vow of indifference, a reckoning. The path demanded endurance, but endurance is not the same as peace. In choosing to remain neutral, the witches became mirrors to the world's hypocrisy, reflections of what it wished to ignore. As the centuries waned, the world grew no kinder. Monsters faded, but moral corruption took their place. Greed wore crowns, and hatred wore cassocks. The witcher's sword could not cleave injustice, nor could his signs silence deceit. The people who once begged for protection now sought comfort in their own illusions, calling witches obsolete. Yet still they walked, not because hope survived, but because duty did. To keep walking was to affirm existence itself, even when the world refused to see it. It is said that neutrality is wisdom, but wisdom without compassion is stone, and stone may endure, yet it does not live. The witches understood this too late. Their creed kept them from the corruption of men, but also from their warmth. They became monuments to restraint. In a world that worshipped excess, relics of discipline among ruins of ambition, and though they claimed to stand apart from good and evil, they bore the burden of both. In the end, perhaps neutrality was never absence, but a fragile kind of mercy, a refusal to add one more blade to an already bleeding world. The witches' silence was not indifference, but mourning. They had seen too much of what happens when men claim righteousness as reason, and so they chose instead the quiet, unthanked balance between destruction and salvation. Thus the path endures, not as a road of detachment, but of remembrance. It is the understanding that good and evil are not sides to be chosen, but weights to be carried. The witches bore those weights alone, walking between faith and despair, between the monster and the man. Their neutrality was their burden, their paradox, and their grace, for in refusing to belong, they became the measure by which belonging itself could be judged. Chapter 8. The Legacy of the Witches. The world that the witches once guarded has long since moved beyond them. The villages they protected have grown into towns. The roads they patrolled are lined with inns and trade carts instead of monsters. In the deep forests, some still whisper that the witches return when the moon turns red, that they walk unseen beside travelers on lonely roads, that their eyes still glow faintly in the dark. Children are warned not to wander too far from the village at dusk, lest the white wolf find them and test their courage. Others speak his name, not in terror, but in reverence, as if the mere memory of such a man could still keep the shadows at bay. The truth is neither, and both. Stories endure where men do not. They wander freer than travelers, cross more borders than kings, and change more slowly than truth. Once the witches were flesh and blood, mercenaries bound by necessity, shaped by alchemy, haunted by purpose. Now they are mirrors through which humankind examines itself. In their silence, people find meaning. In their solitude, reflection. In their endurance, envy. The songs do not remember the pain of the trials or the cold of the mountains. Time has not erased their influence. The ruins of their keeps still stand in the mountains and valleys, silent stones that refuse to fall. Wanderers who stumble upon them speak of an unease that settles in the bones, as though the air remembers. The forges are cold, yet the scent of oil and steel lingers. The libraries are ash, yet a single page sometimes survives, carried by the wind, its ink faded, but legible, notes on monsters that no longer exist. The witch's work endures in these fragments, not through lineage, but through the simple persistence of what was once done well. The people of the continent no longer send for witches when danger comes. They send soldiers, mages, or prayer. Yet when the fields fall silent and the beasts howl where no beasts should be, when children vanish near the forest edge, or the rivers turn black with something unnamed, someone always speaks the old words. Perhaps a witcher still walks the path, and though none ever come, the comfort lies not in the hope, but in the memory that once they did. Their legacy is not one of triumph, but of endurance. They were not saints nor saviors, but reminders that courage need not be pure to be real, that sacrifice need not be witnessed to have meaning. In their neutrality lay a reflection of the world's own contradictions, its cruelty and its mercy, its greed and its grace. They taught by example and by absence that survival itself is a kind of faith, the belief that meaning can persist even when its makers are gone. Geralt's tale, like all tales worth telling, outlived its teller. His story wandered from mouth to mouth, reshaped by time, by bias, by longing. Some say he found peace, others say he vanished into myth, the white wolf still roaming unseen beneath strange stars. Perhaps both are true, perhaps none are, but every story told in his name is a small act of remembrance, a refusal to let silence win entirely. And so the witches remain, not in number, but in notion. They live in the space between fear and admiration, in the pause before judgment, in the half-light between history and dream. Their swords no longer shine, their halls no longer ring with steel, but their purpose has not died. It has merely changed form. They are the conscience of a world that once needed monsters to understand itself. If you listen closely, in the quiet places, where wind moves through stone and the night carries no echo, you might still hear it, the faint hum of a medallion long still, the whisper of boots on snow, the sigh of breath before a blade is drawn. For legends never vanish. They wait, they rest beneath the dust, and the years until the world, once more, remembers why it forged them. Thus ends the tale of the witches, not with glory, nor defeat, but with remembrance. For though the path has grown cold, and the fires of Kaer Morhen are but embers beneath the mountain, their spirit endures, silent, steadfast, and eternal, as all true guardians are. The tale of the witches does not end in ruin, nor in victory, but in the quiet persistence that outlasts both. For every age must craft its own guardians, and every guardian must one day be forgotten by the world it protects. This is not tragedy, but the rhythm by which history breathes. Creation, service, oblivion, and rebirth. The path endures, though its stones are scattered, It winds unseen through the choices of those who act, without promise of reward, who stand where others flee, who lift their hands, not in faith, but in duty. For the Witcher's creed was never about monsters or men. It was about the fragile balance between them. To walk the path was to understand that light and shadow share the same soil, and that courage often takes the shape of silence. In time, even silence speaks. It echoes in the hearts of those who remember, the storytellers, the wanderers, the weary, who still believe that balance can be held, if only for a moment. They may not bear swords of steel and silver, but they carry the same flame, steady, unseen, and defiant against the dark. And so, the legend returns to where it began, to a world trembling on the edge of its own making. Should another conjunction come, or chaos rise anew, perhaps from the dust of forgotten keeps and the ashes of old vows, someone will walk again beneath the mountains and find the path waiting, not as it was, but as it must be. For some roads are never lost, they merely sleep until the world remembers why they were built.